Welcome to another episode of the Global Career Tech Education Podcast. I'm your host, Sylvester Chisom, and I have my wonderful co-host here, Miss Amy Boscan. Today, we are really in for a treat as it relates to interdisciplinary curriculum in CTE. We have a leader, a practitioner, a person who's really doing the work in the trenches and really having a lot of great success. My good friend Chris Manila from Evanston Township. Chris has been a CTE teacher for over 10 years. He shares his best practices at conferences to other educators, not just in CTE, but in algebra. I can't wait for you to hear some of the insights that he has to share. But he's a leader on the forefront of sharing this sort of work, the practices, and leading things in algebra and entrepreneurship. I love hearing his story. I love working with his school, his teachers, his classes. So without further ado, Chris, my man, what's up?
What's up, Sylvester and Amy? Thanks for having me on today. Really excited to share some insights about what we're doing here in Evanston, and hopefully, give some insights into best practices in interdisciplinary CTE stuff.
Absolutely. So first question, why don't you just share with everyone, like, what are you all doing in Evanston with the algebra and entrepreneurship class? Like, what's the setup?
Yeah. So this course, Algebra in Entrepreneurship, it's a dual credit course that we started about 6-7 years ago. Essentially, it's teaching the principles of algebra by having students run their own business. So throughout the year, we typically get, Algebra 1 students in, and they learn a lot of the algebra content by running their business.
I love it. So now I've seen it firsthand, Amy, and I want to just share this. Like, it is like really the epitome of what is happening in the real world as it relates to business or industry. You have the students in there, they have to come up with their own business ideas, but then you use entrepreneurship as the gateway to teach math, right?
Right. So the class started, we were seeing a negative trend with a lot of our Black and brown students coming through Evanston Township. The school, it's pretty diverse. It's about a third, African-American, a third Latino, and a third white. And there was this achievement gap that we were really trying to tackle. So it started as a way to just really engage students into the curriculum of math. And what we've learned as the class has progressed is that kids really learn best when they have their hands on and are actively engaging with content, with things that they find relevant and care about. So throughout this class, they're really uncovering those passions, uncovering that problem-solving mentality. And as we plug in the math, it becomes a lot more digestible and relevant for these students.
I love it. Now, from the school standpoint, in terms of credits, how does that work? Like, do the students get a math credit and a CTE credit, or how does that?
Yeah. So it is a dual credit class. So myself and the algebra teacher, Aaron Mancini, we co-teach the class. So it is essentially two classes that are scheduled back to back. But throughout each class, it really does weaves seamlessly from algebra to entrepreneurship content. But yeah, to answer the question, it is 2 credits that the kids are getting.
Yeah, and I know that's like a thing, right? Amy, I wanted you to jump in on that part. Like, your perspective as a director of CTE, like, what are your thoughts around that, like with credit and?
So I just think that it's so genius. And the reason why it's genius is because this is how the work world works. Okay. We don't silo in the work world. So why would we do that in our, get another call there, decline that. We don't silo in the work world. So why would we do that in schools? So this is a perfect example of where a CTE pathway and a core class would come together and the students would get to engage in both of those and then get their hands dirty in like a career. I just this morning was meeting with an organization called I Built This, and they're a national organization that goes around and puts together different days where they bring students in and they essentially like get to work to build something. So they've done it in Broward County in Florida. Now they're trying to do it in St. Louis. They partner with Target. They're on the ACTE board. Ebony Robinson, I believe is her last name. And so, you know, we're going to have kids go and do that. And so, you know, what Chris is doing is, I think, just so essential to how we need to change the way that school is done.
Yeah. And Amy, I think you hit it on the head. I think we're just scratching the surface here. A lot of what we're seeing is that there's so much opportunity for other disciplines to be brought in. You know, as they're writing their business plans and presenting, you know, there's opportunity for English. We're starting to work with our graphic design and art classes to get, you know, logos and branding filled. So I think, you know, entrepreneurship as a vehicle is just so dynamic that it really can be adjusted to, you know, whatever flavor you want in your school.
Yeah. Hey, go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you know, in the time that you've put those two together, how many students have shifted from a traditional siloed classroom to what you do?
Yeah, it's cool. So we were actually the second of these interdisciplinary classes at Evanston Township. The first was a geometry construction that is, you know, scattered in a couple other districts, but the same concept where students are learning geometry by building a house or building a structure. They haven't actually built houses here. So in those last 7-8 years that we've been doing this, we now have, you know, somewhat of a pathway where they could come in as freshmen, learning algebra by running their own business, to taking geometry as a sophomore, geometry construction as a sophomore, leading up to we have a STEAM class that's really the capstone where we want our students to end in this interdisciplinary education. So, you know, what we're finding is that, you know, all those engagement pieces, all those 21st century skills that kids are able to grow, all those intangibles that aren't on a resume or on a piece of paper that kids are developing, we're finding that they're having a lot more success, or just, you know, that we're seeing.
So Chris, break that down again. So freshman year, they can come in with you algebra and entrepreneurship, and then sophomore year, geometry and construction.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think I saw that, like Shelly was showing me, like they actually like build a house or something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So they are actually putting up, you know, 2-story houses that are being sold in Evanston. So, I mean, it's crazy, right? It doesn't need to be a house. I mean, I think during COVID, they did smaller scale, like sheds. But, you know, same concept that you're actually utilizing what you're learning, you know, so it has some actual relevance
in the real world. Yeah. And that definitely, like I said, I've seen it firsthand just by working with your students. The engagement level, it's high because you've personalized the learning for everyone in the classroom. Like it's something they care about. Now, what's the third one? Say that third one. You said
so the third one,
I didn't know about that.
It's they call it STEAM, design and innovation thinking. So in that course, it's really you know, designed for students to take, you know, an entrepreneurship concept of like solving a problem, but really, you know, elevating it to you know, using all the skills that they've combined as seniors, juniors and seniors.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just talk a little bit about, like, you have bigger class sizes then, if that, you know, is how that works. And then you sometimes are like together with the big class, and then sometimes you're teaching CTE and your math counterpart is teaching math. And then sometimes you're flipping the kids, like, just because I think teachers aren't thinking like that.
Right.
They need to be.
Yeah, I think, you know, the scariest, or, you know, the most unknown shift about, you know, going from a traditional classroom to something that we are doing is, you know, I think you said it, like the first thing you said, Amy, is that in the real world, you know, we don't, you know, businesses don't work linear all the time in a linear fashion, right? It's not always compartmentalized in silos. So the first challenge that we really had is, you know, how do we, you know, offer this experience, but at the same time, you know, fit it within the realm of a school that has a curriculum and has grades and has, you know, a lot of these day-to-day school activities. So we had a lot of failures on our end as we start to scale the class up. And one of the things that we quickly learned is that you can't just call something entrepreneurship or call something like you're running a business and it not really being that, right? So, these kind of like math lessons that have a business focus, but it's not really relevant to anything. These kids, they're able to pick up on it real fast. And, as teachers, we're able to, it's hard, to sell something when you know it's not actually relevant. So,
Chris, I love your vulnerability.
So you've been here for a long time, man. You know those hard days, those hard lessons that we've learned.
Yeah, I mean, but really, like speak to that. Are you saying that if if a school district or a school is going to commit to interdisciplinary, you're saying you really have to commit. You can't just.
So, I mean, I'm talking. I mean, for our experience specifically, I know that I've seen it done dozens of different ways throughout the U.S. And each district has their own fit. And I'll speak locally and directly about like Evanston's needs. Our need was we needed to re-engage kids that were going from the school to prison pipeline, right? They were coming in as freshmen, they were failing their classes, they were disengaged, they hated school, they didn't want to be here, they drop out, by junior, senior year, right? So our specific focus was, let's not worry about grades, let's not worry about SAT scores, let's kind of put all that on the side and let's see, can we re-engage kids first? And then, work on all those other things, right? So, to do that, we really scaled back a lot of traditional school things, right? Things like, multiple choice, standardized tests that aren't really relevant in our eyes. We scaled that back, right? We started to implement a lot more, project-based learning, a lot of, grading and assessment that would reflect, what actually happens in the real world, right? A lot of, revisions, reflection, a lot of those things that, I think are important for kids to have. But how do you get there if, you can't reach them in a meaningful way in school? So, yeah, I mean,
so like what he's talking about is like what we did in our district was we had standards-based grading for algebra, and everybody thought that was going to be the end all be all. And you know what? We have a ton of kids who have a few standards that they need to make up. And you know what we do? We make them do a full algebra reboot in summer instead of just letting them work on the standards. So to that end, I think what you're talking about is what I would call competency-based learning, competency-based grading. And the reason why it's competency-based is because you're looking at knowledge and skill competencies. Those are the two things that roll into the overarching competency. So that's different than standards, because standards, in my opinion, is interpreted by teachers as only knowledge-based. And in CTE, we know that skills are the transfer. That's what you have to do. You can't just, like I was in a class yesterday, family consumer science, and the teacher, I'm coaching this new teacher on, the idea that, having kids present to the class about birth defects is so boring and nobody is learning. All these kids are on their phone. What you need to be doing is talking about like, hey, do you guys know, have you ever heard anybody had a birth defect? And like, what was that like? Like, oh yeah, I knew somebody who was like, I think we call them a small person, but like, yeah, that's actually a birth defect. And do you know what it's caused by? And like pulling them in instead of like pushing rote content to them when they're like, snore, this is so boring.
Yeah. So, and to that point, Amy, I think a lot of what we've traditionally been doing in schools is really pseudo 21st century skills. Things like collaboration. When we're saying like, we're going to put you all in a group, and that's collaboration, right? And what ends up happening, one person does it, everyone else kind of rides.
You get hogs and logs.
You know what I mean? So
hogs and kids that are hogs.
In these authentic situations, right? I feel like these kids, like they're finding ways to, actually contribute in a meaningful way, right? So if there is, someone that is really good about talking to people, talking with people and making sales, they assume themselves as, the person that's going to go out in the community, right? Or if there is someone that is really good with their numbers, they're going to assume that role. So I think the opportunity for like authentic, connection and presentations, I think it just opens itself so much more in a meaningful way.
Now, hey, Chris, if you can think of someone. I love how you said the root of this was to solve our local need, our local problem. the pipeline of ending up sending kids to prison, right? So trying to stop that and combat that, can you give us any success stories or some outcomes? Speak to some outcomes, some things.
Yeah, well, we got a handful, and a lot of this is anecdotal. But I think they're cool to hear, anyways. I mean, we had one kid coming in through here, a pretty average freshman that's coming in. That's an Algebra 1 freshman, I should say. That's really, we're not sure if they're connecting with school or not, what's going on. Throughout the class, they had that aha moment, right? Of, how they could actually utilize their skills to create a business. This is Valerie, the Coffee Bros guy. His skill set, his numbers, what wasn't his, his forte, but he was really good about like talking to people and making meaningful connections. So him and his group, they were able to, set up their business. I think they were delivering coffee to staff, every morning. That was their business model. And they ended up finding it really meaningful, right? So ton of examples like that. What made this kid special was he stuck with that past the year, right? That's when it's really landing. So his sophomore year, he's coming to me at this point. He's scheduling meetings with me. He's asking for advice. He's doing this all on his own, right? So the ownership, it becomes real, right? It's still a school setting, right, where he's learning actively, but he doesn't care about the grade. He doesn't care about turning the assignment. He's doing it because it's meaningful to him. Transfer that to junior year, to senior year. He's actually doing well, right? He just graduated last year. He's over at Howard University. And he just gave me a call a couple of weeks ago saying that, he's setting up a Coffee Bros 2.0 over there because, that's his jam. He's studying business. And that was his calling, right? And I think he reached out to you, Sylvester, right, for some of your.
And I definitely was going to offer commentary on that because I think ultimately when we say like, hey, how are we impacting these kids' lives and how are we preparing them for success in the global marketplace? That is the greatest possible outcome that we could have, with kids in our classroom. And one of the biggest things, so Amy, you may not know this, but I work in like a mentoring capacity with Chris's class, and we've been doing this for
I did know that. Yeah, it's awesome.
Okay.
It's very
going on 6 years now. I think we met I was speaking at ACTE Vision in Las Vegas, and we ended up just connecting based on us being, like-minded. But this particular kid, I thought he had a great idea. I saw how engaged he was in the classroom as he developed this idea. And then Chris telling me like how he was carrying it on after he left the class, sophomore, junior, senior year, even coming back and being a partial mentor to some of the kids in the class. But one of the things that I feel like you really also teach in that class is the self-advocacy, because like Valerie reached out to me on like Instagram and we formed our own like mentoring relationship outside of the classroom. But that doesn't happen without great educators like yourself thinking about how can we bring industry into the classroom to create more of a real world experience and to get what is actually happening in the real world, in that industry, in business today. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and even just thinking about like the formation of how like the root of that kind of momentum started. And, Amy, to your question, or I don't know, Sylvester, if you asked it, but like, how do we format that into like an actual academic like program? And that really just happened like organically. Like we that wasn't a lesson at the time. We knew that we had to get them getting some in-person experience at some point. So we just said, hey, start asking your teachers, introduce yourself and let's see what happened. So, after that happened, we reflected back, like what was the learning moment there? It was just a simple act of having kids, send a professional email, make themselves feel vulnerable, make them have that handshake. Those are those moments where they're actively, I feel like their brains are making those connections of, okay, this is for real. How do I do this? This probably isn't going to go great, but I'm going to do it anyways. So, it was that, I think, aha moment for him that, hey, like a teacher said, yes, like this was real. Like I cared about it. I put myself out there. It works. Let's keep going. Right. Let's keep going. So I think that was like that spark, that, that we provided, right. That platform of just jumping off and seeing what happens.
Well, and I just am already have an idea for our next podcast, because thinking about what COVID has done is it basically has made it a lot easier for industry to connect with students. And the reason is because, we do this all the time. We have these conversations, face to face and over, technology, and we're in 3 different places. And that's what's really cool. So I know we had a kid in our district who during COVID needed to interview somebody about logistics. And so, reached out, we connected him with somebody and they did an interview and it was all virtual. And the reason the student was doing it is because he was taking a virtual class because of COVID. So we're going to see more and more of that mentorship that you and Sylvester are talking about. And if we don't, we're not doing the right thing. Like in CTE, this is just low hanging fruit. This is so easy. Just make that connection. The teacher, the industry person doesn't have to come to your classroom. They don't have to leave their office. They don't have to get a special volunteer background check. You just do this. Perfect.
Yeah, I will tell you, Amy, nothing gets a kid to sit down, focus, and get what they need to say, get ready to know what they need to say, than knowing that they have to go in the room and speak with someone on Zoom in 5 minutes, right? They're not going to be on their phone. They're not going to be distracted. They know in 5 minutes, I'm going to embarrass myself if I don't have this down. So I got to get it down, right? That's
so true. And I'm thinking about something, an experience I just had yesterday, Amy, with the kid from Spark. So Chris, in Parkway, there's a Spark entrepreneurship strand, right? So imagine your class, but it's housed outside of the school. So the kids from all the 4 high schools, they all come to this place. They learn about entrepreneurship. They're connected with entrepreneurs in the St. Louis ecosystem. It's crazy. You would love it. But here's the thing. One of the kids, and they also make all the students get on LinkedIn, set up LinkedIn accounts, right? So I get a message from this kid, Tyrell is his name. I don't know if you've heard about this kid. Okay. So Tyrell is an author. He's 16. He started his own publishing company. And so I get this LinkedIn message hey, Mr. Chisom, I see all the wonderful things you've done in the publishing world and writing books. I would love to just schedule a time just to talk with you, to learn from you. I'm like, wow, this is. And so we get on this call just yesterday. Now I know for sure, what Amy said, if he had asked to maybe meet in person, it would have took a lot more time for us to try to schedule that out. But for us, it's hey, let's jump on a Zoom call tomorrow. I've got 30 minutes. Let's do it. And we literally had a solid mentoring session. And he's telling me how he started this publishing business and he's already sold 300 books around youth mental health. And, he's asking for advice on how I can try to help guide him and push him forward. And I'm like, you're talking about taking the learning outside of the classroom. You have to do it. You have to do it.
I agree. It's all real. And I think the more teachers can figure that out, the better off they'll be, because for administrators, we want these things to happen, but it takes somebody like Chris, who's passionate, to think outside the box and really offer pathway driven opportunities for students that are going to help them in the career field. Yes. And I say career before college because college is just one way to get to a career. It's just one way. We have to remember that.
100%. Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, Amy, because I think one of the greatest things about entrepreneurship is that it doesn't really matter if you plan on running a business or not. Everything that you're doing in entrepreneurship, whether you're problem solving, that communication, it's going to be transferable to some aspects, of career readiness. So, that was a great point.
So Chris, let me ask you this: what advice would you have for CTE director or a school leader who wants to implement interdisciplinary into their CTE curriculum?
So we've gotten that question a lot over the years. And the one piece of advice, that I would start with is just really understand your why, right? Understand why you want to make the change. If it is test scores, you want to improve like your SATs, you want to increase your A's. In the real world, does business, does entrepreneurship really relate to an A? You could argue either way, but I don't know, right? I don't know. For us, our why was engagement. It was getting kids to find relevance. Does having kids work on things they're passionate about make relevance? Yes, I would say so. Absolutely. So I would start there. Understand your why. If you are going interdisciplinary because of relevance, because you want students to be more engaged, I think there's absolutely an opportunity there. I think the one roadblock that I'm talking, especially with administrators, they want to see data. They want to see, test scores move a certain way. And honestly, I think we're not super early in the game, but we're at a spot where I think colleges, I think the world is starting to question, how relevant are test scores? How relevant is GPA? You're seeing colleges that are waiving those requirements because, in a sea of 4.0s where one 4.0 doesn't mean another thing in one spot or another. How relevant is that, right? A lot of the higher education people I'm talking to, they care about those experiences, right? They care about, your personal story of, running a business, be able to tell that story, being able to articulate that. So, starting there is definitely the biggest hurdle for a lot of places. There's other
industry does the same thing. Google Project Zero basically found that students, they took a look at their most productive teams, and nothing was correlated to their ACT score, where they went to college, or their GPA. Not one thing.
Yeah, and it's CTE.
Say that again, Amy. Say that again.
Google has did this data project. It's called Project Zero, and they looked at what made the most successful teams, and they tried to see what made the most successful teams, and nothing was correlated to their ACT score, their GPA, or where they went to college. Not one of the teams had anything to do with that.
Yeah, and I think this message in CTE, we've been saying this message, forever, right? We understand this. I think once you start to go outside of that, and even in this building, there are some, we teach this with math teachers, and there are some math people that it's scary, right? It's scary to, teach this class and not be sure if they're going to meet all the criteria so that the kids could go to Algebra 2 and be successful, or can this transfer to a test? I mean, those are real fears. And, I think, I would bounce that back to, what structure do you want at your school, right? What do you value? Is it the GPA, or is it the overall well-being of the student? So, and
you got to tie it back to the career pathways. So I'll end us with this story. So my counterpart, who does high school math and science, she coordinates that. And so she was having this conversation because in 2 of our high schools, we teach physics to freshmen, and in 2 of our high schools, we don't. And she really doesn't think we need to teach physics to freshmen. And the reason why is because there's so much like Algebra 2 that the kids need to know. But what she came to the realization was during our talk, she's like, how many careers do you think actually need, what career pathways actually need physics? And I was like, none. I'm like, I never took physics. I have 2 master's degrees. And she's like, all right, I'm going to use that for my teacher. So I pulled a bunch of data on the career pathways. And I think it's 35% of students go into the business sort of pathway. If you're looking at the larger 8 pathways, like that business and management pathway, 35% of students go into that. Do they need to know physics? No, not unless they're, working for a bridge building company or something like that. So why do we insist that? Because we went through this thing with rigor and relevance, but I think relevance trumps rigor 100%, especially because kids are doing this with their phone all the time. They're checking facts. Just in this podcast, I've accepted a bunch of calendar invites. I've responded to some emails as I'm listening because our kids know how to multitask because that's how their brain works.
That's deep. Yeah, that's deep. All right. So Chris, I want to say thank you so much, man, for sharing your knowledge.
So nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me on, guys. It's a pleasure to chat. I'm excited to see, more schools do stuff like this and just watch the industry grow as a whole. So, I'm glad I could help and share today. Thanks for having me on, guys.
No problem. Chris, is there any way if people want to connect with you is there anything where we can lead them to your LinkedIn?
Yeah. Lead them to my link. You got my info. I mean, if you look up,
I'm gonna dial you up now, Chris.
Search my name. If you have any questions, we always love to collaborate with other schools. So if you guys have any listeners have any ideas or want to pick our brains a little more, we're happy to help.
Hey Chris, if you can recall, what's the presentation that you did at Vision, or the one that you
what was the name?
Yeah, what was the title? Do you remember?
Interdisciplinary. I think there was another name for it. I would have to look.
Okay. All right, we'll talk about that later because we're working on something for 2022.
Oh no, it was Sell Me Math was the title. Sell Me Math.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look it up on the ACTE stuff, you'll find it.
Okay, all right, we'll figure it out. Well, thanks again, Chris. Thank you everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. Chris is like I said, true believer and practitioner in interdisciplinary, and he's leading the path. Thank you all for listening. And remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.